So it's part 2 of lesson 13. It's our final lesson. We're just wrapping up with our ASP.NET unit testing. So we want to go back to our artist controller. We're going to uncomment all of our create and delete code. We're going to need to make some changes to it. And then before we write any unit tests, once we re-enable all these methods, we're going to see what that does to our code coverage. And then we'll figure out what unit tests we need to write. Lastly, we'll implement those tests, try and get them all working. So I'm going to go up to my line 61. Here are our 2 create methods, our get method that loads our create view, and our post method that adds a new artist. So I'm going to uncomment all of those. We don't need to make any changes in the create. All it does is load the view. So we're going to make a few changes in here. We're going to comment out these 2 lines that are giving us errors. And we're just going to replace that with bb.save. So it will call the same save method that our update is calling. Because that method now has logic where it can do both update or insert, right? So we called this before. Now we'll be calling this part. No ID, so add a new one. And we're going to wind up with the same problem. So if our model state isn't valid, we want to stay on the create view. But for some reason, when we unit test, we're going to be missing the name of the view. So we'll explicitly pass that in as create. So we're also going to enable our delete methods. There are 2 of them. There's a get and a post. And the post, they actually named the method delete confirmed. Kind of strange. They gave it a different name, but it references the delete action for post. So let's uncomment those 2 blocks as well. So on mine, it starts on line 120. And I'm going to uncomment my post. And again, we've got issues. So we want to make some changes here. So our delete has the same 3 conditions as our details and edit, right? Valid ID, invalid ID, no ID. So we'll want to make the same changes. We'll want to replace these HTTP status errors by loading our error view, and we'll change the find to a singular default. So let's make those changes here. We also want to change the find, which no longer works. We're going to use singular default instead.
Why don't we just use this from the beginning when they're making the other methods are working?
Because when you scaffold it, right? Remember, we picked the option scaffold read and write views using entity framework. So find works with entity framework. It just doesn't work with our mock interface for our mock repository, right? Because we're explicitly choosing the option scaffold views with read and write actions using entity framework. So there's our delete. We've made those 3 changes. And then we need to make changes here. So this same, we'll just copy that singular default down in our delete confirm. We'll comment out the find. We'll replace it with singular default again. And instead of calling remove and save changes, we just call db.delete and pass in the artist. Because we created delete methods in our 2 repositories last week. Now we have no code in this delete method. So our mock, that's just kind of like a stub method. But we have this throw not implemented, so we need to correct this. We need to write the actual code in our EF repository to actually delete it. So we only need a couple of lines for this. We just call remove. That's it. We're basically just moving those 2 lines out of the controller and into the repository. So our DLL, we should be able to build I'm going to dock this here. There, that's better. I'll dock it in there. So I can build. So now our code coverage should have dropped quite a bit because we've re-enabled 4 methods that have no unit tests. So we were at 96%, I think, before we re-enabled these methods. Let's see where we're at, and then we need to figure out how many unit tests do we need. So our code coverage is going to drop. So we're back down to 56%. So we dropped 40% by adding in the 2 post methods, sorry, the 2 create methods and 2 delete methods. So let's figure out how many unit tests we need. So we've got 4 methods, right? Make this stuff red because this is our to-do list. So we've got create, get, create, post, delete, get, delete, post. So just like we did here, let's have a look at the code and figure out how many unit tests we're going to need. So here's our create. So how many unit tests do we need for our create get?
1.
Just 1. There's only 1 possibility. We need 1, which is view loads. What about in our post method? How many possibilities do we have in the code?
2.
2, right? Model is valid, we save and redirect, or model is invalid, we stay on the create page. So here we've got 2, valid model, invalid model. 3 unit tests will cover create. In our get delete, Harleen, how many possibilities here? Okay, 2. Which 2 do you see? What are the 2 possibilities that you see? What 2 things might happen? Okay. On which line number do you see invalid? You're right. Just tell me which one where you're looking. The line numbers are here. So what number? Okay. Yep. So that's one possibility. So this is invalid because we have no ID. Okay. So that's one possibility. What's a second possibility you see? Right. So in this one, we have an ID, but we have no artist that matches that ID, right? So invalid. So we have an ID, but it's not valid. There's actually one more possibility. What's the other possibility? So no ID, invalid ID. Yeah. Yeah. So valid ID, right? So we actually find that artist. So same three possibilities we have for edit and details. Valid ID, invalid ID, no ID, right? So we'll need 3 unit tests here. We have those 3 possibilities, so we'll need 3 tests. And what about here? How many possibilities? How many different things could happen? Well, look at the code. How many execution paths are there? Yeah, that's actually the only one. Now, the reason is we could still have no ID or an invalid ID, but because we're doing a delete, doesn't matter. If we try and delete artist ID 1 million, it will still run. It just doesn't remove anything. It will still take us back. So we don't care really if the ID is missing or invalid. In that case, it just deletes nothing. That's okay. So there's actually only one execution path, so we'll need 1 unit test, which is good. That'll lighten our workload a little bit, right? So redirect to index. We've written 10 tests. To fully unit test this controller, we need 7 more tests. Okay, and we have 1 hour and 20 minutes. It's not going to take us 1 hour and 20 minutes. We'll write these tests, and then we'll talk about next week's class. Okay, so let's start here because this one's simple. When we go to artist/create, we just want to make sure this loads the create view, which is a blank page, blank form. Right? That's all we need to make. So we just need this very simple unit test that we load a view, and that view has the name of create. So this one should be pretty simple. I'll put on a little section, so because we're going to have 4 unit tests for create, I'll put on a heading so we know these unit tests all belong to our create section. We'll just call it create view loads. This one will be really simple. We don't have to pass anything in. We're creating a new artist. So we just want to make sure that the create view loads. To make sure this works, remember in our get, if I jump back there, oh no. We'll see if we specify the name. I don't know that we have to specify the name in return view. We'll see if our test passes. If it doesn't, we'll just add the word create in here. So here's our simple test. We'll build and run it. Okay, so it tells us, nope, it failed. That view has no name. So we're going to go back to our controller and specify the name is called create. So in here on line 64, when we're returning the view, let's explicitly declare the name of the view we're loading. You guys done? So if we add this back in, that should fix our error, which it did. So now we can write, so there's our create test, create get, done. 6 to go. 11 down, 6 to go. So now we want to write the 2 tests for post, one with a valid model, one with an invalid model. We'll call it create valid. We need an arrange here because we have to create a new artist and pass that in. I'll make one called A, and it represents a new artist. So we should get redirected to index if create is successful. Right? Save them to the database and load the index view is what we expect. So we'll cast our result as a redirect. We need to pass in our new artist to the create method. Now we have this root name, but again, we're going to use, because we're doing a redirect, we actually need to access the root values because it's the method that's called, not the name of a view that loads. We're accessing the action. So if we pass a valid artist in, we should get redirected to the action called index. Okay, so that passes for us. And now we need basically the exact same code, except we're going to add this line. We're going to create the model state error deliberately. In which case, instead of getting redirected to index, we want to make sure the create view still loads. We stay on the create page if our model isn't valid. I'm going to copy this part, the arrange and act, because they're identical. Actually, I'll just copy this part. The act is different. So there's our arrange. We also need to set the model to invalid. we're manually, again, setting the model state to invalid. In this case, we're not redirecting. We're just loading the create view. Is loaded if our model is not valid. So note the difference. It's important to note. You'll need this both in your assignment and on the exam. Note the difference on line 174 and 192. So when we're redirecting, we are checking the root values action. When we're simply loading a view, we're checking the view result view name. So when we're doing those tests, it's important to think about what is being returned in our controller method. Is it a redirect or is it a view we're loading? So we'll try this one. So all our tests passed. We have 16 total, but really 13 tests in this controller. The about, index, and contact from the home controller we don't really care about. So 13 tests down, 4 to go. Now the tests for the delete get, these are the same as the tests we've done for edit get and details get, right? Because we have the same 3 possibilities. So the 2 Harleen mentioned, no ID, invalid ID, and then the other one when we have a valid ID, right? So we need 3 similar tests for our delete get, and then we only need 1 test for our delete post. So when we re-enabled create and delete, our code coverage went down, I think, to about 56%. So we should be back up somewhere around 70, 80% now because we've added 4 more tests. So let's see where this takes us before we write our last 4. So we're back up to 65%. So create is fully covered now with those 4 tests. So all we're missing are our 3 for our get delete and our 1 for our post delete. 4 more tests and we're done. Yes, the temptation is to just go and copy and paste and modify those tests. I'm actually going to write them. When we're learning, I find the more we actually write the code, the more we internalize what it is we're actually doing. Copying and pasting is much more efficient, but we don't really learn. It's hard to actually learn from doing it. So I'm going to write only 4 more. We have 55 minutes to do 4 unit tests. I think we can accomplish that. So there was our create section. We started it here, and we had 1, 2, 3 tests for create. And now we'll write our delete tests. Again, 3 for get and 1 for post. I guess I'll call it delete, get. So in this case, if our ID is valid, then our view has an artist model in it. So what IDs are valid? What number should I put in here? 1 or 2 or, right. Those are the 3 valid ones. So any one of those will do. And we'll just say, put that all in brackets because we should get an artist back, right? If we pass in 1, 2, or 3, our view should have a model of a valid artist. So in this case, our artists 0. If we pass in 1, it's the same as artist 0. We looked at this already. We pass in 2, it's the same as artist 1. We pass in 3, it's the same as artist 2. So very similar test to the one we've already run for edit and for details. So that passes. Delete artist ID 1 is the same as referencing artist 0. I don't want to copy because this one is different. We're not using the model here. If I want an invalid ID, what could I pass in as the ID? What's an invalid ID? Yeah, anything other than 1, 2, or 3. So what happens in our controller? We have an ID, but that ID doesn't exist in the database. What happens? Yeah, so delete. So that's our expected result. Loads the view called error in this case. If that ID does not exist, we should get the error page loading. Which we do, our test passes. So now we can pretty much just copy this once. This time we can just send in a null. So we should have the same response if we call delete and there's no ID, we should take the user to the error page. So the no ID and invalid ID are almost the same. Okay, we've only got one more unit test. That only took us 6 minutes to write 3 tests. To write our last test shouldn't take us very long. So our code coverage is going to be, I'm guessing 85, 90% now, but we still need one more unit test. We can just see what difference writing that one last test will make. So we're at 84.8%, right? But because our delete confirmed is at 0, that still brings us down. So writing this one test, this is going to take us over 90%, maybe closer to 95 or so. One last test. So let's look at what happens. So what should happen, what we're expecting is a redirect back to index, right? After we delete, we get redirected to the index view, the index action. So there's our last one. We expect a redirect result in this case. After deleting, we expect to get directed to the home page. Oops. Instead of delete, the post method they've named delete confirmed. That's what actually does the delete. So the delete is the get. The delete confirmed is the post method. Here it is here. So this handles HTTP post at the path / delete. It's a little confusing. This is the path. It's like an alias, but this is the actual action name that gets called. So we want to call delete confirmed. And again, it doesn't matter what ID. We'll try it with all kinds of different IDs. It really doesn't much matter. So expect to get index. So again, we want this root values action. That's the method that gets called in the redirect. We're not redirecting to a view, we're redirecting to an action, and that action loads the view. So we'll try this with different IDs, but it should work, whether we use ID 1 or ID 4 or even null. It should pass in all those cases. As I said, if it deletes, tries to delete something that doesn't exist, that's fine, just nothing happens. So let's run that. So it's good with a 1. I'm going to try it with an invalid ID, and then I'll try it with a null. We should get the same result every time. Yeah. So still okay with an invalid ID. Or a null. I will have to do it the same way we did before. I pass it an empty integer. Oh, it won't let me. I can't even unit test this because ID is not an optional parameter. Just skips it. There's nothing there. So back to how I had it. Okay, so there's our test. Let's finally check our code coverage. We'll come back to this list in a minute in reference to the assignment. So our last thing to check is how well covered we are. We should definitely be above 90%. Okay, great. We're at 97.6%. So all of our create, read, update, delete methods, as you can see, are all fully covered. The only thing it's not covered here is that one constructor where we're calling on the database repository. So we'll never be able to get that one covered. So that was with, there's 20 total tests, but we have 17 tests, right? Because those 3 of those tests were from the home controller, index, about, and contact. We don't care about those. We care about these 17 that test all of our create, read, update, and delete methods.